Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Things Talked, which is a complimentary podcast to the YouTube channel All Things Watched. And in this video, we are going to be going into a deep dive into the brand new DC Universe movie, which is, of course, The Flash. Now, if you have not seen The Flash, then I highly recommend you turn away from this podcast, go and see the film, and then come back and listen in, because we are going to be breaking down this movie scene for scene, talking about everything from the cameos to the multiverse, and pretty well talking about every single scene in quite some detail. And we're also going to be talking about the multiverse in general, the cameos like we already said, but also we may even talk a little bit more towards the end of the podcast about the failures of this movie and why it was a box office bomb, because essentially that's exactly what this was. So once again, you have been warned, this is a spoiler review, and if you have not already seen the movie, then I highly recommend you go see the movie and then come back and listen to this podcast. So with that being said, let's go right ahead and jump into the conversation. So the Flash movie opens, of course, with Ezra Miller and portraying Barry Allen, and he's literally standing up inside of a coffee shop, and he's about to make an order when he ends up getting a phone call by the infamous Alfred, who of course is portrayed by Jeremy Irons. I believe his name is Jeremy Irons, and I actually really liked that part of the movie. I really liked how Alfred just casually calls up Barry and asks him for help for something, situation that's going on over in Gotham. So I did really appreciate that. I liked how, that's really a big callback to, the Justice League and to the connectivity of the DCEU, in the sense that, it's just, because he's already met Bruce Wayne, because he's already met Batman in the Justice League, then, this means that he would have also met Alfred. So I just thought that was really cool. I really liked how they actually used Alfred in that sense. And once again, Jeremy Irons' performance, he did a phenomenal job overall, so I really like that, and I thought that was really cool. And what else I thought was really cool as well was the conversation that they actually had, because Barry is kind of like, why don't you call in our bat, our friend that dresses up like a bat, so to speak, and Alfred basically tells him that he's busy, and of course, while Barry is on the phone with him, then he ends up looking at the screen and sees Superman on the news dealing with like a volcano or something in some other different part of the world. So, obviously that, was most likely implied to be Henry Cavill's Superman, I would imagine, even though we did not actually see him or anything like that. That is the only Superman that Barry knew and has ever met, so it's very likely that it was implied that was supposed to be Henry Cavill's Superman, but it's never actually confirmed, nor is Henry Cavill in this movie. Which we'll talk about a little later on, especially with the cameos and whatnot. So, I just thought that was an interesting choice. Excuse me. So then, of course, the Flash ends up suiting up, and we get this really cool scene we get a really cool running sequence by Barry when he runs through the town. He's running through different parts of the city, the outskirts. I'm not even 100% sure where he is here. I'm guessing he's... Well, actually, I was going to make a guess, but I can't really guess. I'm not 100% sure which city he was in here specifically, but during this running sequence, he ends up going, of course, over the Gotham City, because that's what Alfred wanted him to do. So I really thought I just really liked the idea that Alfred called him, and I did still like the idea that they showed Superman on the news, even though there was no face, even though it probably wasn't really Henry Cavill. I still like the idea that they showed that this is a world that has other superheroes besides the Flash, so I really like that. And I thought that concept was really cool and whatnot. But I think what I really liked the most out of this sequence was when Barry was about to run. It's almost like the camera stretched out the city, and then he sort of, charged up almost, so to speak, and then started running. But it felt very much like a slingshot, and I feel like that's kind of how his powers really would work. It really would be sort of like a slingshot, and I feel like when the city sort of expanded and sort of, stretched out, so to speak, it really felt like a slingshot to me, and especially once he started getting going and whatnot. And then he ends up, of course, making it over to Gotham City, and he's there's this building falling and whatnot, and I just thought that opening sequence was absolutely phenomenal. There's like babies falling from the sky. Barry has to run up and catch the babies. He literally puts one into a microwave, which was kind of weird, but still kind of silly and kind of funny as well. But I really thought the sequence was really cool, and I really liked the opening sequence. And quite frankly, I thought Act 1 was the best part about this movie. So then we get our first real cameo, which of course was Ben Affleck's Batman, and we realize why he's not able to help Barry. It's because he's off doing his own thing, and he is basically the scene that you see in the trailer where he's on his motorcycle and he gets dropped out of the airplane, or out of his bat plane, whatever you want to call it, and he's basically fighting against this group, which basically explains why they had to call him Barry, was simply because they couldn't, Batman was already busy. And that whole opening sequence, like I said, was really cool. Now, of course, the CGI was absolutely terrible. Now, I was able to look past that. I was able to forgive the CGI just because of the fact this is a Flash movie. So I didn't come into this movie expecting to see something as pretty as, the Dark Knight trilogy. But I still thought the CGI could have been better. It's definitely one big downfall of the movie was the CGI. But all in all, it was, I was able to take that with a grain of salt, just because of, like I said, it is a Flash movie and whatnot. So I was able to look past that. But that scene, of course, is relatively important. That opening sequence will be relatively important again in the future, especially once once Barry starts to sort of get into that time travel and whatnot. And then, of course, by the end of that opening sequence, after Barry saves everyone, after, Batman tries to save a bad guy, so to speak, then we get another big cameo, which, of course, is Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, and she's really only in the movie for, like, a scene or two, so she's hardly even in there, but she is in there, which is a great reminder that, once again, this is a connected universe, and she is in that universe, and, of course, she ends up actually flying in this movie as well. She flies. So that was a big improvement for Wonder Woman. Something that we have not seen before was the fact that she was able to actually fly. So I really appreciated that, and I really liked that. And I thought that was really cool how they did, how they sort of gave Wonder Woman that power. But it's too bad that they gave her that power in a Flash movie. And I think that this movie ultimately suffers because of, well, it's the same reason that most of the DC universe suffers. It was because I find that, it's just, you have one movie that's supposed to be based on one single character, but then you have a ton of characters in it. And to me, that sort of takes away from, the Flash, the fact that you have Ben Affleck, the fact that you have, eventually Michael Keaton's Batman, the fact that you have all the cameos and everything. As cool as it was to see that, I feel like that's one thing that the DC universe really suffers from, and this movie absolutely suffers from that as well, because as cool as it was to see all the cameos, I do feel like, the movie suffered because of it, because it never really focuses truly on Barry Allen. Now, I will say that there was a scene there that was kind of funny in the sense that, while Batman is trying to rescue this person, Wonder Woman uses her lasso of truth to basically save Batman and the criminal, I guess, so to speak, that he's trying to save. And of course, the lasso of truth ends up getting trapped around Batman's hands and, of course, Barry Allen's hands. And I just, I get what DC was going for. They were trying to, have this humorous part of it, but for me, it didn't quite work. I just thought it made Batman look kind of silly. It did sort of work for the Flash, because he is that type of character. He is that silly, happy-go-lucky type character, but I felt like it really did not work for Batman. And so for me, I didn't really laugh. I didn't think it was really all that funny. But anyways, that's how they decided to go with that opening act. But beyond that, I still thought the first act was the strongest part of the movie. I still thought that sequence was one of the coolest sequences. Despite the silliness with the Wonder Woman and the truth of Lasso, I did still really like that. I did still like the sequence overall. So now finally, after that sequence, Barry is able to go back to the coffee shop, and he's able to finally get his whatever it was that he ordered. But the significant part about this scene is that this is where he ends up meeting up with Iris West. Now, anyone that's familiar with the comics knows Iris West and knows how important she is to the Flash, how important she is to Barry Allen, and to basically that comic book story in general. Now, obviously, there's multiple comic book stories of all the heroes, but, Iris always plays a pretty key role in most of them and whatnot. So Iris was portrayed by Kiersey Clemens in the real world. That was her name. That was the name of the actor. And honestly, I thought she did an absolutely phenomenal job with the little bit that she was given. But I will say that her character, I kind of feel bad for her because I really feel like they underutilized Iris, especially with how important Iris is to the Flash. I felt like her being in this movie was almost not, there's basically no point. It didn't further the plot. It didn't help the plot. There was basically no character development with Barry. So for me, I felt like it was just a complete waste of a character. But also, I found that it almost sort of was did quite a disservice to the character, because Iris is so beloved in the comics and she's so awesome. She's so cool with the Flash. And this actor, Kiersey Clemens, did a phenomenal job at portraying Iris with the little bit that she was given. So I really feel bad for the character. I really felt bad for the actor, and I really thought that DC really dropped the ball on this character, Iris. So, like I said, I loved her interpretation, I loved her performance, but I just feel like they really dropped the ball, and they really did not do much good for Iris's story. So then we go to the jail scene, of course. Then might be jumping ahead a little bit, but we basically, at this point, I think most people know the Flash's story. His father is in jail, basically because he was accused of killing Barry's mother and whatnot, which is not really a big spoiler. If you had have seen that, the CW version of The Flash with Grant Gustin, then you would know that storyline anyways. And once again, I feel like this was another story point or a story plot point that really fell short, because this should have been extremely emotional. This should have been something that the audience really felt. Their connection should have felt, just so real, and so, their bond should have felt unbreakable. And honestly, I didn't connect with Barry's father whatsoever, and I also didn't really buy into the relationship. Even as good as Ezra Miller's performance, I never felt like they were truly connected. I just felt like I really felt like they were just acting, and that they really didn't know each other in the real world. I never felt that, father and child type bond. And I think that is something else that this movie did really bad as well, was I think they really dropped the ball on that part of the story as well. So then Barry ends up running over to his home and over to his house, and he ends up basically seeing, the house that he grew up in, and he basically ends up having a bunch of flashbacks, which I did enjoy the flashbacks. I thought the person that played the young Barry Allen was absolutely awesome, and I also really liked the actor that played Nora, and her name in the real world was Maribel Verdú. So I actually really liked her performance. Like I said, I really liked the young Barry Allen as well. But once again, I never truly felt all that connected to them. Now, I do think that relationship was done well, so I should say that, I guess. I did feel like Nora and Barry's relationship was done pretty well, but a lot of that had to do with Esther's performance, and also the actress that played Nora, Maribel Verdú. So I feel like it was really the both of them that really made this work. It wasn't even so much the writing or the directing. I just felt like the actors themselves did such a great job at making it believable. And I absolutely loved Maribel Verdú's performance. I think that she was even probably better than the one on CW. I just really liked her performance. She was definitely one of the highlights of the film, for me at least. All these things are subjective, but I really liked her, and I really loved how she portrayed Barry's mom, and I thought that it was very believable as well. So then we get to the first real, true, I guess you could say, flashpoint part of the movie, which is when Barry starts to run, and he starts to finally run faster than time. And this is the very first time that he truly runs faster than the speed of time. So this is a brand new experience for him as well. So as he's experiencing this, is basically the same time that we are experiencing this as the audience. And even though the CGI was really bad in this movie, I did really appreciate this part of the movie. I really liked the CGI of the Speed Force, and how it looked when Barry actually went so fast that he actually moved faster than time and space itself. And I really thought that was really cool, especially when he starts sort of, building kind of like this ball of light around him, which really is like a vortex, and then he ends up going faster than time, and everything turns blue, and then like his legs starts, even though he's running forward, his legs starts to go backwards, his body starts to like all of a sudden have this tail, almost like a trail following him, so to speak, because he has finally went so far that he is, like we said, he has broke that he has broke through the barrier of reality, and I absolutely loved that sequence and how it looked, and then the infinite possibilities and the infinite types of universes. And basically this was the first true introduction to the multiverse, but when we first get there, they don't go too crazy with it. It's really only showing the basic people. You're seeing Iris, you're seeing Barry, you're seeing his mom. I think they show like the Man of Steel, which was Henry Cavill. I believe they showed Barry's father. I think they showed Wonder Woman and Ben Affleck's Batman. So you do get some cameos here, but it's not really any cameos that we haven't seen before, at least to my knowledge, as far as I can remember. I've seen the movie twice. I was going to see it 3 times, but I couldn't justify giving the studio any more of my money because, I did really enjoy the movie, but honestly, I actually liked it less the second time around. So every time I watched the movie, well, I only watched it twice, but I enjoyed it a lot more the first time, and the second time I was really not that big of a fan. I started to like it less, which is not good, especially for rewatch value, which is why another reason why I think this movie really bombed is because of how bad the movie really is once you start to really dive into it and see, just the little things. For me, the biggest thing was that I never once really felt like this was a true Flashpoint or even a true Flash movie from the sheer amount of cameos. But we'll get to that point. So anyways, right now Barry is inside Speed Force. He's seeing stuff that he can't normally see, and he's starting to realize now, wow, I might actually be able to travel through time to some degree, and whatnot. So he ends up coming back, and he ends up spending some time with Iris into his, at his apartment, and they sort of showcase Barry's abilities a little bit. He starts to vibrate, which changes his his molecular structure, I should say, which actually gives him the ability to actually go through walls and stuff, and he can walk through solid walls and stuff like that. So I really like that kind of stuff, and so. I just thought that stuff was really cool. And I think I went past something here. Yes, I went past the conversation that Barry has with Bruce, of course, Ben Affleck's Bruce at this point. So he goes to Bruce after experiencing this time-space paradox. After he breaks through the reality barrier, he ends up going and talking to Bruce and saying to Bruce, hey, I think I figured out how to do legitimate time travel, because we know he already did some time travel in the Justice League anyways. But he actually approaches Bruce and he says, hey, man, I think that I can, go back in time and save my mom. And he actually tries to use that on Bruce as well. He says, not only can I save my mom, but I might also be able to save your parents as well. And of course, Bruce, Bruce, I think for a second, he kind of thinks about it, but at the same time, Bruce at this point is very grounded, and he realizes, going back in time can have some serious consequences. So it's not a good idea to do that. And maybe we should just sort of let it rest. So I really liked that. I really liked how Barry tried to convince Bruce. It's almost like Barry wanted approval, but Bruce didn't really give it to him. Bruce was like, yeah, that would be nice. Yes, if we lived in the real world, we can't really do those things, because if you go back to change the past, then inevitably you're going to change the future, and we don't know what the ramifications could be for that. So I really thought that writing in that conversation was really good. In fact, I believe in the real world, Ben Affleck actually said that he really, really loved his portrayal of Batman in this movie. He said that he really nailed it in this one, and honestly, I do believe that. I do think Ben Affleck really nailed this sequence, and I really thought he nailed his performance here. And so after Barry talks to Bruce, this is when he ends up going, I believe, when Iris ends up coming to the apartment. And he ends up looking at some footage which he got from security cameras of his mom. Excuse me. And it shows her shopping in the grocery store, of course. And essentially, this is when he gets the idea, maybe, this is the time when I can intervene, because he realizes that she's trying to get something on some shelf. So he's like, well, if I intervene, maybe she won't go for it. Maybe she could really be alive and whatnot. And this is what really piques him and pushes him to go to, to that next level. And so he tells Iris that he has to leave, and then he suits up, and this is now when he's going to really go, basically ends up going back in time. I don't even really know if he necessarily goes back in time, or if he actually goes to an alternate reality, because, the trailer seems to imply, and even he says sometimes it seems to imply that he actually created a new reality. But when you actually see it, how he ends up going back in time is that he ends up, I don't know if you would call it dark flash or reverse flash, but it turns out that it's actually the younger version of himself, but grown up older. But either way, he ends up going into that timeline because he ends up getting punched into that world and into that universe by the older version of his younger self, if that makes sense. Well, really, it's his younger self, but grown up. But yeah, so how he goes back in time, which is why I was saying in my review on the channel, it is a little bit deceiving because he doesn't truly go back in time. It's just when he's in this, this area, when he's sort of in the multiverse, that other version of himself ends up punching him into the world where he basically ends up getting trapped, so to speak. So he does travel back there on his own, but it's almost like he gets stuck there, so to speak. But that's one part of the movie that I didn't really understand. So maybe if you guys could, fill me in there, let me know in the comment section or something. I never really understood that part. Like, why, if he got stuck back there, like, did he actually travel back there? Because I was under the impression that the other version of himself punched him in there. But then once he got in there, like, he still had his powers for a little while before losing his power. So I don't know. To me, that part was a little bit. I just didn't quite understand that part. I couldn't remember. I couldn't really tell. Did he just go back there on his own, or did he get punched back there? I know he got back there on his own, but then the other version of himself ended up punching him into that reality. But I don't really understand why he didn't. Why didn't he just, run back to the reality? Or maybe he decided that he's just going to stay there. Because he does go back and he does change something, so... which you end up seeing. So, yeah, so he ends up going back and changing some things. And, yeah, that's what happened, yeah. If I can... Trying to pick it up out of my notes. But, yeah, so he ends up going back because his mother ends up picking something off the shelf. And that was a pretty good scene. I have to give it to Ezra Miller. That was pretty... that part of it was pretty emotional. It was pretty sad to see that. And then when he runs back to the vortex, I guess to go back in time or to go back to his own timeline, then that's when he ends up getting knocked back into, this alternate reality by his own version, by himself or whatever. And I thought, I did think that was a little bit predictable. But having said that, this is based on Flashpoint. So if you know anything about Flashpoint, then you would probably know, how this movie is going to turn out anyways, because it is very much like Flashpoint with different elements, but there were parts of it that were really predictable, but I just wasn't expecting him to get knocked into that universe by himself. But like I said, all that stuff is sort of explained in the movie later on, more towards the end. Like, himself went back there and forced him into this reality, because if he didn't, then the other version of himself wouldn't end up with powers. So it could be a little bit confusing maybe, but I thought the film did a really good job explaining it. So after he goes back in time then and actually gets knocked into this alternate universe, or the past version of his universe, he ends up, actually staying there, and he ends up seeing his mom and whatnot. And so, he ends up having dinner with them, and he basically ends up running into the younger version of himself. But he realizes that his younger version of himself don't yet have any abilities or any powers or anything like that. So he wants to help him by taking him to, I believe it's Star Labs, or maybe his workplace at the forensics area. I can't remember exactly where he took him, but he took him either to Star Labs or to the forensic area, wherever it was where he actually got his power. And of course, the lightning bolt ends up coming in, but it ends up striking them both. It ends up striking the same Barry that we've been following since the Justice League and Batman v Superman. So it ends up striking him and the new Barry. And of course, that lightning strike had some huge ramifications on both of them, because it gives the young Barry his powers, but it also takes away the powers of the Flash that we had been following the whole time. So I don't know really how I felt about that. Like, I understand why they did it. They did it because they sort of had to, in order to push the story forward and whatnot. But I did like the CGI. I thought the CGI looked really good in that scene. I thought it was pretty believable. The lightning looked really good, and also Ezra Miller did a great job at performing that scene. You could tell that he was in a lot of pain, and I really liked how after the bolt hit the both of them, they both end up just dropping to the floor. So I really liked that as well. It was very believable, very realistic, and I also like how the lightning bolt actually came in through the chemicals, because I was a little bit curious about how could he, sort of give Barry sort of that treatment, even if he went as far as bringing him to the lab. Like, I was curious about the chemical side of it, but one good thing that sort of did was that it did sort of act as an origin story, because we never really truly had a Flash origin story in the DCEU. So I thought that was one good thing about this movie, and about this new young Barry end up coming into his own powers. It was sort of like an origin story for the Flash, which was something that we haven't had. So I did appreciate that, and like I said, I did think the lightning looked really cool and whatnot. But like I said, it was a pretty cool sequence overall, and it was really nice to see Esther performing against, sort of portraying both two different versions of himself. Of course, the younger Barry is sort of acts the way that the older Barry, or our Barry, the one that we've always known, the way he acts back in the Justice League. He's sort of like a fish out of water, and he's excited, and he can't wait to see, all the other heroes. He's really excited about being a part of things. But really, this, I guess to some degree that sort of makes sense that the younger version will be like that, because that's how he was with the Justice League. So I guess that actually makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. But still, there were times when he was very annoying. But it was fun seeing him come into his powers and learning how to control them and whatnot. And of course, at this point now, once our Barry ends up losing his powers, then they realize that they need help. And that they need, they got to reach out to somebody. And of course, the only person that Barry really knows is, of course, Batman. But of course, before we get there, he ends up giving the young Barry his suit, which is in the ring. Which, of course, I believe that Ben Affleck's interpretation of Batman, it was Ben Affleck's Batman that gave him that ring, I think, because I can't quite remember how they explained it in the show, but he did have the ring, and I would assume that it was just given to him by someone from the Justice League or whatnot. I would imagine he got that from meeting them. But anyways, he gives the ring to the younger version of Barry, and then, of course, it shows Barry how to use it or whatnot. And that was pretty cool, because that was sort of like a scene from the comics, as far as I can remember. I haven't read a Flash comic in quite some time, but as far as I know, that really did happen in the Flash. He opened the ring, and I think it was like nanotech or something, and the suit ends up getting bigger. And then, of course, because of him being so fast, he's able to suit up really quick. So I really like that part of it. I really like the CGI. It looked really good. And then we got to a sequence which I thought was really cool, and quite emotional for that matter, because we get to the scene now where finally General Zod basically is coming into the story. And General Zod is basically, he's one of two nemesis, I guess, of the story. He is... I see a lot of people say online that there's two bad guys, and that there were, multiple enemies in this movie. And that is true overall, but I think I would still say, ultimately, I think Zod was still the main bad guy, in the sense of him having to save the world, whereas, I guess not. I suppose not. No, there were two enemies, yeah. Zod was just the enemy of this reality, whereas the other version of himself was the enemy of all realities. So, yeah, I guess that makes sense, yeah. So I guess Barry versus Barry was really the enemy. So the younger version of himself that we follow in this movie, where we basically get the origin story, he is really the enemy of the show. So, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense that there are two enemies. And now Zod, of course, General Zod, well, we'll get to Zod in a second. First, let's talk about the scene here, which I thought was pretty emotional, which is where Barry is telling the other version of Barry of all the events that happened in his reality, which would have been back during Man of Steel, which would have been back in 2012, I believe, was when that came out, or 2013 maybe, or 14. No, it must have been 2000. Yeah, I think it was 2014 in the DCEU, and it was just a heartbreaking scene where, he doesn't have his suit yet. He got his powers, but he don't have his suit, and Barry just got like a helmet on, and he's like wearing like hockey pads and that kind of stuff. What looks like bulletproof armor, but I don't really know what it was. It's probably not, because I can't imagine he would have had access to that at that point. Or maybe he did, where he was into forensics and whatnot. But it was just such an emotional scene, because he has to make a choice when he goes to Metropolis and he sees Zod, and they're using the gravity device where they're altering gravity, and Flash and Barry has to save this child, but he's not able to save the child's father. And he knows that he's not able to save the child's father. So what he does is, rather than try to save him because he knows he can't, he actually turns so that the child won't see his father be killed. So that was a really, just a really sad scene, really emotional scene, just because it shows, well, one, it shows that Barry really did care. He does care, and it shows that he does have a lot of heart, and he didn't want to, the trauma of that little boy, and everything that they were experiencing. He didn't want that, he didn't want that child to be, traumatized for life, so to speak. So then after that, then of course, Barry still remembers that he still needs help, to get his own powers back. So this is when he reaches out to Bruce Wayne. But what he doesn't realize, and what he does not expect, is that in this alternate timeline that was, I guess, created, or whatever it is, or he went into in this other version of the multiverse, in this version, this of course is Michael Keaton's Batman. Now, there was one little thing that happened here that I'm not 100% sure. I may have overlooked it, but I think there was one scene where this Michael Keaton had a little bag, and the young Barry shook the bag, and he was like, "This bag is laughing," or something. And a part of me wondered, is that a reference to Val Kilmer's Batman because of the Riddler? Because in that version, when it was Riddler and Tommy Lee Jones who played Two-Face, I'm pretty sure that in that version of Batman, the Riddler was the one that had the bombs that laughed. Remember, it was like a bunch of bouncy balls, but they were explosions. But whenever he shook them, they laughed. So a part of me wondered, does that make Val's Batman canon as well? Like, is his version of Batman supposed to be a continuation of Keaton's Batman? Like, does that mean like his Batman will really be Michael Keaton's third movie Batman? And now it's just that we have Michael Keaton back. You know what I mean? Like, does that still count as canon? Because to me, that's what I got out of it when Barry said that about the laughing bag that was down in the Batcave. In the Batcave, to me, that was a reference to the Riddler. But I could be wrong and whatnot. But either way, both the Barrys end up at Wayne Manor, and when they get there, they see Michael Keaton's version of Batman, and of course, they don't recognize each other. But whoever was the stunt double for Michael Keaton, that was really awesome. Michael Keaton at this point looks very old and ragged and rugged, and but he's still very spry for an old guy. He's still able to move, still able to fight. But you can tell, he's been doing this for a while. He's a little rough around the edges, but he does mention in this scene that Gotham City is safe now because of him. So I really like that they sort of followed up to his movies and potentially Val's third movie as well, because I am under the impression after seeing this that Val's third, Batman Forever, is a continuation of Batman, whereas they sort of treated George Clooney's version of Batman sort of as an alternate version, even though it is probably hypothetically a continuation. They do treat George Clooney's Batman more as an alternative version of Batman, not the same as Ben Affleck's or the same as Keaton's, but something separate completely. But we'll get into that later on. But I really liked Keaton here. Keaton was definitely the star of the show. I really loved Keaton and his continuation of Batman. And, of course, Sasha Calle was awesome as Supergirl, too, but we'll get to that when we get there. But while here, Barry explains to Bruce that he has come from the future, and that, it might be a little bit hard to believe that, but that's what he tells him, is that he's come from the future because he's trying to manipulate some events in the past. And, of course, Bruce sort of, what I like to call the noodle theory, or the string/noodle theory, is Keaton talks about, and actually demonstrates using spaghetti noodles and a bowl of spaghetti, what would happen and what the ramifications could be in changing, events from the past, which would inevitably change events of the future. And of course, then he ends it by pouring the sauce on top of the noodles, and he's basically like, this is what you would get. You would just get one big plate of mess. Basically, it would just be a mess, and you would actually do more harm than good. Now, that one scene would actually become very significant toward the end of the movie, because of what Barry ends up having to realize for the climax of the movie. Basically, he ends up having to realize that exactly what Michael Keaton's Batman said to him is accurate. That is exactly what happens, is everything becomes a mess, and they need to, and basically the realization that Barry has at the end of the movie is that he can't save his mom. He has, in order to protect everything else, he has to go back, and he has to go, he has to go back and undo what he has already done, if that makes sense. So it's almost like he has to go back again a second time to undo what he went back and did, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit hard to explain it over the course of a podcast without actually sitting down and watching it with you, or without being able to show you the clips. But who knows, maybe one of these days we'll redo the clips and whatnot. But anyways, the two Barrys sort of wait for Batman, because at first Batman sort of refuses and doesn't really want to help. And also when they're waiting for him, they're in the Batcave, and in that Batcave is where that little I don't know what you call it, little baggie or little purse type thing, or little bag with those laughing bombs, which I think came from the Riddler. Like I said, I could be totally wrong, but that's the impression that I got. That's where they see that down in the Batcave. Of course, Michael Keaton ends up shaving everything and puts on his bat suit, and he looks awesome. Like I said, he's one of the highlights of the movie, and I would not change anything about him. So basically the idea here now is that they are going to go on a mission, and I think it was over in Russia somewhere, I think is where they went, and they are going to help Supergirl. They are going to help Supergirl escape, and there were a few things about this part that I wasn't 100% sure, that I didn't fully understand. Was the fact that why did anyone even know where she was? For one, neither one of the Barrys would know, because they weren't, well, the young Barry won't know because he's new to the superhero stuff, and future Barry wouldn't know because this is an alternative timeline, so to speak. So I didn't really understand and that part of it. And even with all of Bruce Wayne's technologies and everything, if he knew where Supergirl was, then why would he have not already helped her? Now, maybe they did explain that in the movie and I just overlooked it or missed it, but I was curious as to why didn't he help her beforehand? Like, why did Barry have to go back in time to get Batman's help in order for him to just, like, why didn't Batman or Keaton's version of Bruce Wayne, why didn't he just automatically go and save Supergirl? So I didn't really understand that part. I didn't really know what was going on there, especially once General Zod did come. Like, why didn't why didn't he just help her anyways? You know what I mean? But anyways, I guess that's something that you sort of got to look past. Like I said, they might have explained that in the movie. I just missed it. But I was, kind of scratching my head at that two times. The two times that I seen this movie, I was sort of scratching my head at that. I was like, well, I don't really understand what's going on here. Why didn't Bruce Wayne just automatically save her to begin with? But anyways, they figured out, and then they go on the rescue. And once again, this was an awesome opportunity for Keaton and his version of Batman. The fighting scenes here were really, really good. The young Barry got to learn a little bit. He actually ends up getting shot, and I really like that scene because he says, because he looks at the version of Barry that we've been following the whole time, and he says, "I didn't think we could get shot." And then our version of Barry is like, well, why would you think that? Why would you think that we couldn't get shot? So I really like that little bit of banter that they had. Although I was hoping that the Flash suit would have had somewhat of an armor. I understand that it was nanotechnology, but it was still technology all the same. And it did appear that it sort of, or potentially had come from Batman anyway. So I was a little bit surprised that he was able to get shot. I just assumed that, if it was a nanotech, then maybe it would have had some form of, armor or something, but, little thing that really doesn't matter, because it is realistic, because, the Flash is able to get shot, usually his suit, at least to my knowledge, his suit is never usually, bulletproof, but it doesn't really have to be because he's faster than bullets anyways. At least typically, but I guess young Barry, this new version of Barry, just probably wasn't used to it or didn't really know, so I was able to look past that. But I will say that Batman had an awesome fight sequence in this one. Michael Keaton's Batman was awesome. Did a lot of really cool stunts, really cool moves, and you could really see the flexibility of his version of Batman now in this one, whereas in the old days, back in the 80s and early 90s, he wasn't really able to move all that much and maneuver all that much in the costume that they used back then, but he could in this one, and you could really tell that Keaton was really having a lot of fun with this one. So it was a lot of fun seeing him do that and whatnot, and I really liked it. The only thing that I didn't like about Keaton's portrayal of Batman in this one was the fact that I feel like they didn't develop him enough. I felt like Keaton was in here just for the sake of being here. Like, I kind of wish they had filled in the blanks a little bit more. Like, what has he been doing for the past 30 years? Like, I mean, I know obviously he continued to fight crime. He did say Gotham City was one of the safest places now, thanks to him, but I still felt like maybe it was, I just feel like they could have I don't know, maybe give us some flashbacks or something. Like, I would have loved to seen a flashback of Keaton's Batman, which would have given us a lot more of him and his fighting sequences and whatnot. But either way, I'm still loved him, and I still thought that he was the best part of this movie. And they would not have been able to rescue Supergirl if it wasn't for Keaton and his version of Batman, because of the fact, he really is a boss in this one. You could tell that he's a leader. He really helped them and saved them when they were getting shot at and potentially almost going to be killed over here trying to rescue Supergirl. And it also showed how smart he was, because he was very quick on his feet. He was able to think really quickly. So I really liked all that. And then, of course, they end up getting Supergirl, and they were able to rescue her. And that first scene that we really get of her outside, when she's lying down in the snow and the sun is on her, was actually almost kind of hard to watch, because you could tell how deprived she was. She was really hurt. She was really injured and whatnot. And I absolutely love Sasha Calle's, I think they pronounce her name as Calle in real life, Sasha Calle. I really loved her interpretation of Supergirl, but only with only with what they, the little bit that they give her. I still can't really, her character still wasn't really developed. There was no character development with her whatsoever. I feel like the only reason why she was here was for the sake of, basically replacing Henry Cavill as Superman. I know that they didn't want to keep using Henry, given the fact that they're not moving forward with Henry. So I can see that, but I do wish that they had have gave her some form of character development. But with the little bit that they did give her, I really like Sasha's performance. I actually wish she was in the movie more. She really wasn't in the movie as much as I thought she would be. I don't think that she comes into the movie until it's like an hour and 20 minutes, or maybe an hour and 30 minutes. So, you're already into the second half of the movie before she even arrives. And I kind of wish she was in it a little bit more, especially with how she was promoted in the marketing campaign. I really thought that she would be in the majority of this movie, but she's really not. She wasn't in here as much as I thought, and I wish she was. And I also wish that they gave her a little bit more backstory. It would have been so cool to see a flashback of her leaving Krypton, coming to Earth, or something like that. There's just so many opportunities that I feel like they could have done here and missed out on. But like I said, I can't really say that I connected to the character, because I didn't. Like I said, there was no emotional or no development with the character in that sense. So when I say that I really like Sasha Calle's performance, I just mean, like, I really liked how, like, sort of like badass she was. She was very aggressive. She didn't take no crap from anybody. She was very assertive. She knew who she was. She knew what she wanted. In that sense, because I can only judge her, based on the outside, because we didn't get any development or any real emotion or story from her. So I can't judge her from the inside, because, like I said, we don't really even know her. We only know what we see here, and what we get here is very little. But the little bit that we do get, I can say that I really appreciate her performance. And I really, really loved it. And I really loved the sort of exchange between her and Barry when, she's talking about her cousin, talking about Superman, just kind of briefly, and talks about, because in this world, Superman actually died as a baby. General Zod ended up killing him before he got to Earth. And he wanted to extract the Kryptonian code, which we see in Man of Steel. But in Man of Steel, that code was put into Kal-El, whereas in this one, it's put into Kara. So that was a little bit of a difference, but still not anything too crazy. But that is a little bit of the difference that we've seen here compared to the universe where Barry came from. Because where Barry came from, the Kryptonian code went into Superman, whereas here it went into Supergirl. But still really cool, really fun. I really enjoyed that. Like I said, I really didn't like General Zod for the same reasons. I didn't like the fact that they really didn't develop the character. He's literally only in this movie for the sake of being a bad guy. There's literally no development. I would have loved to learn a little bit more about Zod in this one, especially considering it's a different iteration. It's not the identical Zod that we got before. But still, all in all, it's still cool to see Zod and the other actor. What's the name of the other actor who portrayed Faora, I believe it is. Oh, Angie. Is that how you pronounce their name? Angie or Angie or Angie Tra or Tro? I'm not even 100% how to pronounce her name. But either way, it was great to see her back. I loved her performance in Man of Steel, and I loved her in this one as well. But once again, there's absolutely no development, no emotional attachments. I would say that there's pretty well, even with Barry, like there were moments that I had emotional attachments with Barry, but I really didn't have any emotional attachment pretty well to any other character, any of them. Even with Keaton's Batman, I loved Keaton. I thought he was the best part of the movie, but I still didn't really get any emotional attachment to it. But anyways, back at the Batcave, they end up basically doing an experiment on our version of Barry to try and make sure that he can get his powers back. And of course, the experiment almost works, but not quite. It does fail. So that's when Supergirl comes, Kara comes, and takes Barry up into the sky, which you do see in the trailers during a lightning storm. And of course, that's how he gets his abilities, was because of her. And then we basically go from there and we move pretty well directly right into the main battle. Well, after he gets his power, they go back to the Batcave, and then they end up getting then the new version of Barry, young Barry, the new alternate version of Barry, gives our version of Barry back his suit, and then Michael Keaton gives the young Barry a new version of his gives him his own gives him his own. I had a notification there, sorry, on the podcast. But anyways, the Michael Keaton's version of Batman gives him his own version of his suit, and and that's basically what the new version of the young Barry ends up using, this new version of the Michael Keaton suit. So anyways, that was really cool. And then we get to the main scene, the main battle. Once again, like I said, I thought the CGI was still really, really bad throughout this whole film. Like I said, I was able to forgive it in some scenes, but not all scenes. Like I said, I did think especially with this scene, like the last battle, there was times when I feel like it should have been very realistic, but it wasn't. And then there were times when, I don't know, I really, even times when I felt like the actual human was really there, I still felt like it was still very fake. Even when the real human was there, it still felt fake and whatnot. And the explosions felt really fake. It felt really green screen. Like I said, I actually liked the movie less the second time around. I enjoyed it a lot more the first time, but after seeing it for a second time, I like it a lot less now. And I found like even when the two Barrys were talking to each other, because our version of Barry is trying to sort of mentor the new version of Barry, because he doesn't yet really know how to use his power. So during this fight, they're sort of mentoring each other as well. Our version of Barry is mentoring the young version of Barry. So I really appreciated that and whatnot. But like I said, it was still, I don't know, it was still very CGI, and I think that's why a lot of people really didn't like the movie, besides all the stuff going on in the real world. But anyways, this battle went on what seemed to be, felt like forever. It was a really long battle, and it kept going over and over and over, and finally, once Barry, the young Barry, or the new Barry, starts to figure out his powers a little bit, then he's able to finally run so fast that he ends up going into the vortex himself. Just like our version Barry did. In order to get into this new world, he had to go over to that, he had to go into that sort of Speed Force area, and he had to sort of go, and run faster than space and time itself. So once our version, or not our version, but the new version of Barry ends up discovering that, that's when basically he becomes the villain, because he keeps going back in time over and over and over, because Kara and Bruce Wayne keeps getting killed, and no matter how many times they reset the timeline, no matter how many times they refight this battle, Kara and Bruce die over and over and over and over, and this of course creates sort of a loophole then for the new Barry, the new alternate young version of Barry, because now he's no longer able to let go, and he tells our version of Barry that he's not going to stop until he figures out how to save them. And of course, that's how he basically becomes the enemy, because then we learn that this old Dark Flash that hit our version of Barry into that universe is actually the young Barry grown up. So you basically sort of have two versions of Barrys. Well, you have three Barrys, but only two versions. You have our version, but then you also have the new alternate young version, but also the old version of that young version, if that makes sense. So you have a young, a medium, and an old, and the medium is our version, and the young and the old is the alternate version, who has constantly been going back in time over and over and over, trying to save everybody and trying to win that battle. But it gets to the point where they realize that that battle cannot be won, and it is inevitable. Now, in this Speed Force, before the ending truly comes, and before that young Barry sort of gives, a valiant, gallant sacrifice, which is really how they end up beating this new Flash, is as they go through that vortex, this is when we start to see the worlds collide. And this is when we get into the multiverse cameos. And this is a problem that I sort of have with both Marvel and DC. They're both moved into the multiverse. And I think that they both have ample opportunity to do so much cool stuff with the multiverse, but they just haven't been doing it. So I don't really know why. But we'll get into that in a second. I have to start a new clip here, but we'll get into that in just one moment. Okay, so we finally get into the multiverse now, where we get all the cameos and we see the two different Barrys inside of like the Speed Force, or or outside of time and space, or whatever you want to call it. You get what I'm saying. They're in that multiversal spot where they're outside of time and space, and they're able to see all the different universes. And of course, the reason why they're in this position to begin with is because of the fact that this younger version now has sort of gone a little bit crazy and just no longer is willing to give up on the fight, and they just want they want to be able to they want to be able to save everybody, and they're not willing to lose the fight. They're not willing to forfeit the people. So they're constantly going back and trying to save things, and because of this, then you end up with this infinite amount of possibilities, and this creates a big problem with the shift of the time, with the shift of time and space, causing all these other realities to start to collide, basically. And that's when we really get all the cameos. And as I was saying a minute ago there, that the biggest problem that I have with the DC and Marvel, both of them combined, is that I just don't understand why they don't fully utilize the multiverse. I don't know this was an awesome opportunity for DC to throw in every single, project that they've ever done. They could have thrown in, first let's talk about the cameos that were there. We did see Christopher Reeve's Superman, and also Helen Slater's Supergirl, which was really cool. So that was really fun to see. And we also got to see Adam West's Batman, and of course Robin as well. And of course we got to see George Reeves' Superman, which was really cool. But the coolest and honestly most surprising cameo that I honestly wasn't even willing to see, or wasn't even ready to see, I was not expecting to see, was of course Nicolas Cage, who was supposed to play Superman in a project known as Superman Lives, and they actually showed him fighting this giant spider, which was in the concept art. In fact, John Schnepp did a documentary a few years back called The Death of Superman Lives. I think that's what it was called, The Death of Superman Lives and What Happened, or something like that. So you can actually go and watch that documentary. But in that documentary, because it was supposed to be that Tim Burton was supposed to direct that movie. And so you can actually see in that documentary where he goes and talks to Tim Burton and gets all of the concept art, all the visuals, all the art, all the visual arts and concept work of that film. And in that movie, it was Nicolas Cage in his suit, and he was fighting this giant spider. And I think the main nemesis of that movie was supposed to be Brainiac and whatnot. So but anyways, they actually show that in the Flash movie, and honestly, I thought that was probably the coolest cameo, and it was a cameo that I really was not expecting. Having said that, I don't know why both Marvel and DC still have not utilized the multiverse. Like, this was a perfect opportunity for DC to throw everything in there. Excuse me, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Like, there's no reason why they could not have thrown the Dark Knight trilogy in here. Like, can you imagine if we had have seen Christian Bale's Batman? They could have thrown in, Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern. Whether you liked it or not, they could have thrown it in there anyways, just to show that it is a DC project. Or at the very least, they could have showed some form of Green Lantern, even if it was only a CGI version. They could have thrown in Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. Like I said, they didn't have to be considered canon. They could have just been all these different multiverses, and that's something that I didn't understand. Like, why didn't Marvel do that either? Like, I don't understand in the Multiverse of Madness, when Doctor Strange goes through the multiverse, I could never understand why didn't Doctor Strange, see other universe. Like, they should have totally went to the Fox universe. We should have seen the X-Men in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. We could have seen Blade, Wesley Snipes' Blade. We could have seen the Fantastic Four with Chris Evans portraying Pyro. Like, there's so many opportunities that they could be doing with the multiverse. And I really felt like the Flash really dropped the ball on that. Well, for one, pretty well every cameo that we ended up getting, for the most part, was just Superman. It was a bunch of different versions of Superman, and then it was Adam West Batman. I mean, literally, it was, 3, 4 different versions, or 2 different well, you had Christopher Reeve, George Reeves, Nicolas Cage, and then and you could make an argument that it was Henry Cavill's Superman at the very beginning of the movie on the news, just that he was back on. So, you mean, we had literally like 4 different Supermans and pretty well all the Batmans except for the actual good ones. Like, they could have put Matt Reeves' Batman world in here, just like a glimpse. They could have put, Robert Pattinson in there. So all those different actors and all those different roles, they could have easily thrown them in there, But they didn't, and I always feel like, sorry, my voice is going from talking so much, but I feel like there's just so much of a missed opportunity, and they could have done so much with that, and they just chose not to. I don't think I've seen anything from Smallville there. They could have thrown in the Smallville. They could have thrown in Swamp Thing, something from the CW, or something from, any of them, really. But once again, all the cameos were just Superman and a couple of Batmans. But really, that was it. And to me, that was really disappointing. And I just felt like they could have done so much more with that, but they didn't. But it was really cool to see Helen Slater and Christopher Reeve's Batman. I really did like that and whatnot. And then, of course, the movie, and then after the cameos and after the cool multiversal stuff, then eventually the movie ends, and it ends with the new alternate young Barry having to sacrifice himself in order to stop the older version of himself, because if the younger version dies, then the older version would simply cease to exist. And that's ultimately what happens, and Barry makes that sacrifice. And once Barry makes that sacrifice, then our version of Barry realizes that the chaos and everything that came with the other version trying to, save everybody, but not being able to. So, like I said, it created so much chaos that our version of Barry is then able to realize what he needs to do. And what he needs to do is he needs to let his mother go. So he ends up basically putting something back so that she is, that fate would be inevitable. And then he ends up going back to what he thinks is his own timeline. And then he ends up going back to what he thinks is his own timeline, and he ends up changing. He ends up changing a few things so that his dad ends up having to look up at the camera, and that ends up sort of letting his dad go free and getting out of jail and whatnot. And then, but then the movie ends with him going to where he runs into Bruce Wayne, and then it ends up being George Clooney. And that's basically how the story ends. It ends with this version of the Flash being in this alternate reality now, where George Clooney's version of Batman is the new Bruce Wayne. Now, so I've seen online a lot of people were probably a little bit confused by that. They didn't really know, what does that mean? Does that mean that George Clooney is now the new Batman? Or does that mean, how's it going to go from here? Does that mean that the DC universe has actually reset? Because this movie was pushed as being a reboot or sort of a sci-fi reboot. But I wouldn't actually say that. I would not say that this movie was a reboot or even a sci-fi reboot. What I would say this movie is that this movie is basically a goodbye to the DCEU. Because I don't think that this movie was a reset whatsoever. I think that really what this was is that now that our version of Barry that we've been following since the beginning, all the way since Batman v Superman, is now in his own alternate universe, and he's just sort of out there on his own. At least that's the impression that I got. I don't believe that the DC movies that are coming in 2025 with this new reboot with James Gunn, I do not believe that they are in this universe. So it's not that Barry reset the universe or restarted the universe. What I think they did is they just took all the characters from Barry's universe and sort of put them aside and sort of put them into their own universe, and basically, that's basically what I feel like this movie did. It didn't reboot it, it just separated the universe from the new universe. So it's not that it's a reboot or it's a new start, it's a completely different universe. It's not that it started over, it's just these new heroes are not going to be in this universe, if that makes sense. So it's not that it's a reboot or a soft reboot. It's just they're in a completely different universe now. At least that's the impression that I got. And I also think that this also leaves the door open or even closed for Ezra Miller and him ever coming back as the Flash. And I think that that's probably where we're going to go to next in the podcast. All in all, I did really like the movie in terms of a DCEU movie. I did say that this was a really good DCEU movie, but I will say also in terms of rewatch value, I liked it a lot less my second time watching it, so I don't really know how how that will go with audience. It's already been a box office bombshell already, so I do not suspect that this movie is going to perform much better, because usually the opening weekend is the best, and then it drops dramatically usually each week. So if this movie has already performed badly, then there's no reason to think that it's going to be any better now at this point. So but all in all, I did like the movie, and I did like the movie in terms of a DCEU. I think if I were to rank the DCEU movies now, I think I would say probably Zack Snyder's Justice League was my favorite, and then it was probably Batman v Superman, and then it was probably Man of Steel, I would think, and then probably The Suicide Squad, which was really done by James Gunn, but it was still in that connected universe. Then I would probably say Aquaman, and then I would probably say this movie, The Flash. So this is probably my sixth favorite. My first time watching it, I liked it a lot more. I really thought it was probably like my third or fourth favorite. But now after I seen it the second time and I let it sort of sink in, and I started to notice a lot more of the inconsistencies, the lack of character development with a bunch of them, the lack of development with Zod, the lack of development especially with Sasha Calle's Supergirl. She should have been developed for sure. But I would like to see her move forward. I would like to see if James Gunn would be willing to keep her. I think that she has the potential to be a good Supergirl. I just feel like she never had the chance here, because I don't think that she was written really good. And like I said, there's no backstory or anything. So I do think that if they gave her that new position of Supergirl, or that new if they cast her to be the new Supergirl, I would be okay with that. But I think that they would maybe want to change her look as well. But it is possible, like I said, this movie does end in a way where it could be just a one-off. Maybe James Gunn will cast someone completely different and whatnot. But I always heard people, even James Gunn himself, say, this is the greatest superhero movie of all time. Well, folks, it's not. It's not even that good. Is not only is it not one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, it's not a good superhero movie. It's not even a good DC movie, and it's really, at least for me, it's only my sixth favorite, even DCEU movie. So, take that into consideration. Like I said, after I seen it the second time, I liked it a lot less. So I would not say that this is a reset or a soft reboot. I would say that this is just something different. And what they really did is they basically said everything up to this point was canon, and everything up to this point do exist, but really everything exists, but in its own pocket. And that's sort of how you can look at all these projects. Linda Carter's Wonder Woman, Christopher Reeve's Superman, and all those projects and franchises are all in the DC universe, but only in the sense that they are multiverse. So I really am curious now to see how Blue Beetle will fit into all this, and the new Aquaman. I just really don't even see how you could have Aquaman in it after after this movie. I don't really know where you would go from there. I don't know if James Gunn plans on keeping Jason Momoa for Aquaman, so I guess we'll have to wait and see there. But yeah, all in all, like I said, I did love the movie the first time around. I did like it a lot less the second time around, once I started to sort of pick it apart and whatnot. And like we said before, this movie was a box office bombshell, but there were so many reasons why. I am someone who have publicly defended the Snyderverse. I have publicly given the DCEU some of the highest ratings of all movie critics or reviewers. And if I'm going to be honest with you, though, we still have to face the reality is that even though the Snyderverse fans are loud, let's be honest, they don't show up to movies, because none of the DCU projects really, with the exception of Aquaman, ever hit $1 billion. We had a Justice League movie, and it only made like $600 million, a little bit more than 600. At least to my knowledge, I don't think it even hit $700 million. And I mean, that's just not good enough, folks. I mean, Spider-Man No Way Home alone made over $2 billion. I mean, Marvel has had multiple projects reach at least $1 billion. And then you get the scatter one like No Way Home, which ended up hitting $2 billion, which was crazy. I think the Avengers Endgame or Infinity War, or maybe both, I think they both hit like well over a billion, or maybe even 2 billion. And then you have a movie like Justice League. Even Batman v Superman should have hit a billion. But Man of Steel, I would say, was probably the most success that they had, and then it just kind of went downhill from there. So, even though I'm a huge DC fan, I was a huge DCEU fan, I was a huge Snyderverse fan. People lie, but the numbers don't. Numbers don't lie, and the people were not showing up for the movies, and even the ones that did show up for the movies, they were not returning for multiple viewings. They would go and see it once, and then the drop off will be huge, that this is nothing other than the fact that DC just don't have it together. So I do think that James Gunn and Peter Safran do have quite the uphill battle to face and to climb. I do think they can do it, but I don't think for a second that it's going to be easy, and I don't even think that Superman Legacy is going to make huge amounts of money, because I think they have to earn back the audience now, and honestly, I think they have a long way to go, and I'm not even 100% sure at this point if they'll be able to do it anytime soon. It's hard to know. Some people think that, the superhero fatigue has kicked in, but that's not really a thing. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 has done huge numbers, and even though Ant-Man and the Wasp was a really bad movie for the most part, it still hit almost 700 million. So, these movies are still making money. So the fatigue, I don't think that there's really such thing as superhero fatigue. And not only that, but you look at something like The Boys, Amazon Prime, The Boys, one of the, extremely successful. They're still making those shows. They even had a spin-off show. So, people are not getting, tired or sick and tired of the superhero genre. I think people are just simply getting tired of not getting good superhero movies, and DC has been on the decline for quite some time now, and they really got to get their act together if they hope to continue to be a juggernaut, or to even be a competition for that matter, because really they're not a competition. They've, the last 2 or 3 movies that they've released now have cost them money. Black Adam cost money. The second Shazam cost them money. This movie undoubtedly will cost them money. Birds of Prey cost them money. The original Suicide Squad probably cost them money. Even James Gunn's Suicide Squad, which was significantly better, still barely broke even, I think, even if it even did break even. So, it's going to be very interesting to see where they move forward and how they go from here. But either way, I think they all have an uphill battle to go and whatnot. But, that's just the way it is. But anyways, folks, that is my breakdown and open spoiler discussion of the brand new DC Flash movie. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. I hope you enjoyed our first true episode of the Flash and of the podcast and of All Things Talked. That's originally what I was going to call this, All Things Talked. But I said I better keep the original title of All Things Watched for the sake of keeping it simple for you folks. And so you don't get confused. For anyone that might migrate over from the YouTube channel, I didn't want to make it confusing for you folks. And also there was a post-credit scene to The Flash as well, but it's one of those scenes that, it just really doesn't matter. It was only sort of like a one-off. It was just Barry, I think it was Barry and Aquaman or something like that, and it was like this new version of Aquaman that's sort of there, and he's I don't know. It's one of those scenes that you really don't even need to see for the matter. It was just kind of there. They just kind of threw it in there, so I don't know. I guess you could, if you want to stay there and watch it, you can. But like I said, I just don't see any of these movies doing well now until 2025, because of the fact that, they know that there is going to be new casts, new heroes, new writers, new directors. It almost seems like it's kind of a waste of time to even go and watch these movies anyways. And then, of course, you have Ezra Miller and all the drama that he's been facing in the real world. So it's just, this movie was just, it had to go through a series of unfortunate events, and that's exactly what happened. Because of that, the movie suffered, and nobody showed up for it like they were hoping and projecting, and I don't believe for a second that people are going to start showing up. I think the movie failed in the first week, and I think it will continue to fail worse and worse as time goes on. But on the bright side, if you have HBO Max, you're probably going to have the opportunity to see it for free very, very soon. So with that, folks, that's all I got for you. Let me know in the comments section below if you've seen this movie, The Flash, and if you'd like to tell me why or why not. If you like the podcast, and follow along. I really enjoy these open spoiler discussions, and I hope to keep these going, and Also, I want to do an after show. This is where the after shows are going to be as well, and I plan on doing one for Secret Invasion. So hopefully that will be good and whatnot. So, but beyond that, that's pretty well all I got. And I hope you enjoyed my open spoiler discussion for the Flash movie. I hope you enjoyed the Flash movie. I still enjoyed it overall, but I did like it a little bit less in my second viewing. And I would say now that this is probably my 6th favorite DCEU movie. But I am really excited for Blue Beetle, and I'm excited to see what they do with the Aquaman 2, and I'm really excited to see what James Gunn does. So I'm still really excited for DC, but they really do have to get back on track. And with that being said, folks, that's all I got for the podcast. And until the next one, take care.